everyone. Welcome to the BizDev Podcast, the podcast about developing your business. I'm David Baxter, your host, and I'm joined via satellite by Gary Voigt. Can you hear me okay, Gary?
Yes, I can. I'm on the new Verizon satellite network.
Right. Oh, no, that means it's a bad satellite. We are joined today by Paolo DiVincenzo. He is the CEO of Base Estate and also of a new startup called Inorganic that we will talk about a little bit later on today. But first, we wanted to nerd out about the home, right? Is that what we're doing? Could talk about the home?
Yeah, we're going to talk about some of the smart home devices that were either unveiled or reported about in the CES, the Consumer Electronics. What do they call that? Is it the trade show or what's the actual?
Consumer Electronics Show. I've actually been to that thing twice. It's so much fun.
That's why I asked you. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, the good news is that
heaven.
Since multiple different companies are making smart home devices, and then of course you have multiple apps that are controlling those devices, and then say if you have a couple different brands of these devices working on your home, then you got to manage like 2 or 3 different apps just to do the same or similar things. So there's been, I guess, a new protocol that's kind of going to overlook the communication of these over the Wi-Fi called Matter, and a lot of the big players are going to start making sure that their devices can connect to this protocol. So hopefully in the future that'll lead to maybe you'll have like one app, like kind of like a super remote that can control anything from like if you have the garage door opener or if you have your Nest, and then you have, LED lights that are smart lights, all the way to say, Amazon Alexa or any of the Apple products that come through.
Matter's even better than that. Matter is like before, Paolo, have you ever bought a smart plug or have you ever bought one of the smart lights or anything?
I equipped a whole smart home with a hodgepodge of different apparati on different protocols.
So you feel me.
So this fits your experience then.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, because I have at my house, I have mostly Google gizmos, like the little discs and screens. But then I have a Hue light bulb, and I have a bunch of Chinese plugs. I don't even know the name of the companies, which is probably super safe. And none of them talk to each other, right? That's just like, especially like you have to buy the Hue bridge, which is like $50 to get a light bulb to work. But this fixes all that. Like now you can choose your path, Google or iPhone or whatever, and they just all work now. Even Google will talk to Apple, which is hilarious to me. But
there
that
are
matters
some
a big
devices that are still, they're not, fully equipped to get onto the Matter network, but they are working towards it. So, but those are like the high-end niche ones that aren't super popular.
The problem is all the devices Paolo has now have to be upgraded. So you have to buy all new devices.
Yeah. I was actually biting my nails because all my stuff is on Samsung, and what is it? Samsung Smart Things. And then they just announced, we're revamping our protocol, and some stuff might work, some stuff might not work. And so I'm just sort of waiting for the other shoe to drop. So far, everything's staying connected, but I don't think that's going to last for long.
Yeah, when you buy new stuff, they won't talk to the old stuff.
Is that just a firmware update maybe for some of the newer stuff, but then the older stuff just can't communicate with the way the Wi-Fi is receiving the signals, or?
I don't know. Samsung sent me a notice, and they said we're doing some fundamental changes to our platform. And they said, third parties who are integrated with us, some will work, some may not work. The onus is on them to get things working.
Yeah.
So, and I've got so many different providers of gizmos on there that we'll see which ones maintain and which ones fall out.
Right now, it's painful, right? We're all having to switch things out. But in 5 years, this will be a conversation. We'll never have to have this conversation again. This should have happened a decade ago. But everyone wanted to own their own stack, right? Google wanted to dominate. And I never liked the idea that you had to marry one. Like if you were using an Android phone, you couldn't use a whole fleet of stuff and vice versa.
Yeah.
And that always seems so dumb to me. But apparently it took a decade to realize that was not a good idea. And they finally did it, which is crazy to me. There's another one that came out right behind it that, the MagSafe on the back of the phone.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The way that this was created was there's a standard called Qi, which is what Android devices use, and Apple took that, improved it, added magnets. It's all an open standard, but then they made it MagSafe, and they just released it back to Qi so that they can do their own magnets and stuff like that. So those, you might be able to buy third-party little Doomaflitchies to stick to your phone. And Android can finally have
The Qi
this,
chargers
because
can now
that's been
work with
patented.
iPhones? Because there's been,
In theory.
yeah, there's been like the wireless Qi chargers for a while. I don't know if they'll still.
There's debate whether or not they released the concept of the magnets, but the question is whether or not Apple will allow Qi 2 to work with MagSafe because they're Apple, dude. But I wonder how. I would love to know. They don't want to break that up, but how many bazillions of dollars do they make on dongles and chargers? That are
Enough to keep
proprietary?
doing
It must be a
enough
lot.
to keep doing it.
Yeah.
For sure.
It must. Well, and they're being brought to court now because the UK, or not UK, the EU, got to get my acronym right, is requiring them as of the beginning of 2024 to have USB-C charging. So for this exact thing, like we're talking about, they have had Lightning for 12 years, something like that, which is proprietary. And what's really funny about all that is, you know who made USB-C?
Apple.
Apple. They invented it. And they turned it into a standard. They invented it because they wanted one charger on their little MacBook Air. They wanted one port. That was the original one. That was like paper thin. It was the first thing that had USB-C. All right, so today we have Paolo, and I'm very excited to talk to you because your main company, Basis State, is something that I find super interesting. I'm a startup guy. I've worked with dozens of startups over the years, mentoring, building, whatever. And I have heard of this idea before, exactly, and I'll let you explain what it is, but I never saw it take off the ground. So I'm very intrigued by the fact that you got it to work. So tell me about Basis State.
Yeah, I mean, I hear that a lot. It was very much born of my own need for something like it. And a lot of people have said the same thing, like, why hasn't this existed previously? You know, after having been in it for a few years, I think I know why, because it's hard to do.
It's hard, yeah.
But, you know, like you, I'm a startup guy. Have been doing startups and working with early stage tech since the late 1990s, so a long time. And had several exits of my own. All of them were to strategics. So never had a PE knock on my door and say, hey, I want to take your business, buy it and scale it. It was always either partners or competitors who were in my space who said, we'd like to plug the capability that you have into our larger business. One thing about those conversations was it was never really about how my business was doing financially. It was always about the capability I had. And the value conversation was always around, all right, this is the kind of value you can create if I plug you into my larger base of customers. It was never like, hey, your $300,000 ARR is really interesting to me, like I'd like to scale that. And I realized the entire industry of putting startups into the hands of larger companies, it sort of centers around the P&L of the acquired company. You know, the presumption is you're going to sell for a multiple of your revenue, when in reality, the conversation has nothing to do with that. It's the value is always around the economics when you're plugged into the larger platform. So Basis State is founded around that, is we're going to take companies that don't have a scaled line of business, ones that are looking for exits, and we are going to find them acquirers on the basis of their capabilities. So we started the company about 3 years ago, maybe a little over 3 years ago, have worked with somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 startups or so, have been successful with most of them, haven't found buyers for many of them, but all those buyers have been strategics, and by and large, the valuations on the companies has been really healthy considering they didn't have scaled lines of businesses.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, because again, we build startups pretty regularly, and some of them don't make it, right? So let's say they spent, I'm going to pick a number, $200,000 on tech to build whatever their idea is.
Right.
Your company then takes that tech and tries to get some dollar for that. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, the idea is, so you've built tech, that tech has value. Let's say you haven't been able to get the economics to work. That doesn't mean that suddenly that tech doesn't have value. The tech still has value. It's just the business model doesn't have value. And so the idea is, if we can take that tech and plug it into companies who can see the value in it or have, you know, a business model that can make it work, then, you know, your company is worth something and not nothing. And so that's really been the entire premise behind it. And something I know from having had these conversations myself, and now having spoken to hundreds of strategic acquirers, like this is the way they think about acquisitions. They don't think about, well, this company is only doing 800,000 in revenue, therefore blah 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 blah. They're thinking about, okay, when I put this into my company, this is what it does, and this is where the value comes from. What's interesting is the main thing that we are selling with these startups is time and opportunity cost, because big software organizations can build pretty much whatever they want, but it's going to take them time. And so what they're buying when they're buying a smaller company and its capabilities is they're buying basically an accelerated roadmap, and that accelerated roadmap has a financial return to it. And so when they're thinking about value, like that's what they are thinking about. They're not thinking about the P&L of the company they're acquiring.
So it's a big part of that conversation when you're finding, this is like M&A on a tiny little scale, right? But
Yep.
Company A builds tech, and company B, your job is to find company B who might be interested in tech, right?
Right.
And so is part of that conversation the stack that they use? Like this was written in React, and I'm an Angular shop, so never mind. Or does that not even enter the equation?
That absolutely enters the equation. So interoperability is definitely something. The team is definitely something, because
That's a question
as
I
you
was
know,
going to ask. If along
Yeah,
with the tech, you might, the people that developed it and then have, kind of created it from ground up and know it front and back and forth, do they go along with the tech if the opportunity presents itself?
it's always better if they do come along, and we tell that people straight up. Like about halfway through our history, we started turning away companies where, let's say, the founders had moved on and gone to other jobs or something. We said basically there's not a whole lot we can do here. We can't do a lot with tech that's just sitting on a server with no people behind it, because a lot of the value comes from the people, and that's not just to transition the asset into a larger stack. It's also just when you have people who have been staring at a problem for 3 years, like they know that problem,
Right.
and a lot of the missteps that you would take trying to address that problem, from a cold start, are going to be avoided by bringing on a team that's already been through that thought process. So the team has immense value from several different angles.
So generally speaking, if I spent, again, $200,000 on, and I picked that number out of the air, do you tell the founder, hey, you can expect to make that money back, or a percentage of that, or more than that? I mean, on average, how does that, do they get their money back that they've invested into it, or not really?
It depends. By and large, that's the sort of that's the bar that everybody's trying to get over, right?
Sure.
So that's what they're looking at. Like, can I get out of this without losing money? And so, we do our best to get there. Sometimes we get there, sometimes we don't. But when we're talking to value, we don't even look at that. So it's in the back of our heads in terms of, okay, this is what would be considered probably by investors to be an okay exit, is to get out with a little bit of return, or at least get our money back. But the reality is, when we're talking to value, we're not looking at that. We're not talking to revenue, because value has nothing to do with that, right? It's, you were going to develop this feature. It was going to take you X amount of time. During that time, you'd be foregoing this kind of revenue. That is the value you're buying. So that's really where we sort of center in terms of putting a value on a piece of technology.
So how do you find buyer B, right? Like, I'm not looking for the secret sauce, but just generally speaking, that's a weird thing. Like, they don't know that startup existed, much less that
Right.
they even needed what they were building. So how do you connect those two?
Well, see, we start with the presumption that they do know that they needed that piece of tech, right? Maybe they didn't know that startup existed, or maybe they were under the impression that they were going to build it themselves. But what we found is almost 100% of the time, that piece of tech is already on the company's roadmap somewhere. Maybe it's one of these things where, well, it's been deprioritized for 2 years. Like, we know we need it, people are asking for it, but we've got other pressing priorities. And then, all of a sudden, this opportunity to have it in short order has fallen into our lap. Okay, let's move on this. So, our secret sauce, if you will, and it's not so secret, is casting a wide net, because what we're looking for is sort of that serendipity where we find a company that's already got that on their roadmap and is looking to buy something that'll accelerate it. So in order to do that, we do a couple of things. First of all, we sort of take a step back and we look at the startup in terms of its capabilities. So in order to cast a wide net, we have to look beyond its market. So, let's say you're a fintech, but your core competency is in some sort of automated forms processing, right? Well, you're not just going to be within the world of finance. Like, those capabilities have applicability outside of finance. So we take a step back and we say, okay, where else could this capability have value? So we're trying to basically find as many different segments where there might be a potential buyer. And then within those segments, we're basically looking for the best prospects. And that's how we manage to
Are you actively
contact
reaching
them.
out to these companies and
Oh
trying
yeah.
to? Okay.
I mean, nobody's out there aggressively looking for these small companies usually. Like,
Yeah, it seems like almost like it's a reverse headhunting kind of situation where you're trying to. Once you do find a company that does have this tech on the roadmap, I mean, how are they going to be introduced? You're going to have to aggressively kind of get that conversation started, right?
yep, yeah, we have to get in front of them. All these companies that we're talking to usually have corp dev functions. So they'll have people whose responsibility is to go and grow the company inorganically. But what they're looking for is those big revenue accretive acquisitions.
Yeah.
That are going to make the papers. They're not really that interested in this kind of acquisition. But if they have the opportunity to do something that product has wanted done for a while through an acquisition, they're gonna talk to us. So we just have to get in front of them.
So I talk a lot of times to startups and when mentoring and whatnot about the two stages of startups is before you're awesome and once you're awesome, right? It's before anyone knows who you are, and then once you have your own gravity. It's kind of the two worlds. In your case, basis state, when you're starting this company 3 years ago, no one knew who you were. You have no idea where the startups are who are failing. Like, this seems like such an amorphous thing. How did you get going?
I know investors who surely had some stuff in their portfolio that they knew was going to be looking for an exit. So we sort of started there, started locally with people who knew us really well. What we found, though, is every investor has stuff in their portfolio that's going to have to find a new home at some point. And they are more than happy to make those introductions to the founders to get that process started. And so what we realized is, we started with people I knew. Once we had a little bit of a track record and a process that we could point to that was repeatable, we started to move outside of people we knew into other investors. But in terms of outreach, we really got all of our traction through talking to investors. That's where it all started. That's more or less where we get all our referrals to all our new clients.
How did you've mentioned briefly that you were starting up another gizmo from basis state. Can you tell me anything about your inorganic?
Yeah, sure. So, some interesting things happened in 2022. We got really popular because there were a lot of companies looking for exits, and the exits got harder to find, right? So we ended up, we still had plenty of interest coming in from acquirers, but they were slower to move. The valuations were lower. We had a couple people get cold feet, like right when it came to board approval. So right at the last minute, they pulled an LOI. So we started having these disruptions, which affected our revenue, right? So we had this interesting dynamic where we had a ton of clients. We're basically maxed out in terms of our capacity. And at the same time, our revenue was flat. And so what we realized is, this business model that we have, there's obviously a big need for it. It's way beyond the need that we can serve. And there's some inherent, problems with having a high touch service and managing like this size deal. Which is why, like most M&A advisors, they say, if it's going to be lower than $15 million, we're really not that interested. And I mean, there's a reason. The economics are challenging. So we started to bump up against that in the fourth quarter. And we've always had this idea in the back of our head where if we could really be disciplined about automating everything in our process, we might have something that was able to serve all of the clients that we really want to serve. And that's really where Inorganic was born. Can we create a self-serve platform out of some of the underlying concepts that we're using? And it's been tricky because when you know something really really well, you tend to fall back on manual intervention. So we've automated chunks of our process, but there's always been these sort of in between pieces where we're like, that doesn't look right to me. Let's tweak that valuation a little bit. And so we've had to kind of go back and look at those manual interjections and say, all right, like if we were a computer, like what's the processing we would be doing to arrive at that conclusion? So it's a difficult process, but we're making gains against it, and that's sort of the idea behind Inorganic is, all right, can we make this so it's self-serve? Can we make it so it scales, and can we make it so we don't have to sort of limit our capacity?
That's very cool. That's very cool. I mean, this whole idea is so interesting to me because I've told the story before, but years ago, we turned 10 this year, so I'm guessing we were in year 4. And my project manager at the time, Dion, who's still one of my favorite people on the planet, comes to me and says, a startup had failed is the context I'm giving you. And he's like, are we part of the problem or part of the solution? And that just hit me right in the jellies, right? I mean, it was, because I was like, they gave us money, we built them a beautiful app, but it died anyways, right? And so we realized, and we changed our business model pretty dramatically from there because we started asking a lot more questions. But I would have loved to have been able to say, hey man, this didn't work out, but here you go. Maybe there's something you can do with your tech. Maybe not, I don't know. But at least there's an off-ramp rather than just saying, well, my $100,000 of personal savings or my family and friends or whatever, I'm at super early stage, just went down the toilet and I have to apologize at Christmas. Right? It's like, I love the idea that this is a thing.
Yeah. It's, I mean, like I said, the companies that I managed to exit, financially, or at least in terms of like looking at it through the lens of an investable business, they were not highly scalable businesses, right? I was not going to find, that Series A, B, C, and D to get this thing cranking, and so it was fortunate that I was able to find strategic buyers. So I know that market is there. I know the appetite is there. It's not a 100% proposition. Like I said, we're not able to find buyers for all of our companies, which is unfortunate and a painful part of the business. But I can say that the vast majority of these companies would have ended up winding down probably, and I'm thrilled that we could find half decent exits for a lot of them.
So outside of this, your main company, Basis State, you and Inorganic, you've come from a long line of amazing, stuff. I mean, looking at LinkedIn and stuff like that, we're working at iPlace and CEO of all sorts of different cool companies. This has been a repeatable thing for you. How has the startup life, how's the entrepreneurship, how did you get started in all that?
I got started with that at iPlace, which you mentioned. So I went from AT&T of all places
Nice.
over to iPlace. Actually, I went from the federal government to AT&T to iPlace. So it was like a quick, fall off the cliff in terms of company size. And iPlace was really my first exposure to a great exit, right? And I don't think I knew how lucky I was to be a part of that until well after. Because the founder of the company was super disciplined about taking money. Like he raised very prudently. I think they raised all of $3 million or something, and it was a pretty sizable business. And I think that $3 million was from a strategic investor who gave them business in kind, along with that investment. So it was a very well architected deal. And then, it grew super quickly and it found a great exit. And that all happened within the span of 2 years. And so to, get a front row seat to that was really kind of whetted my appetite for, okay, this is how it's done right. I'm going to go and see if I can do this myself. Never quite got to that level myself. But, I did manage to grow companies from zero and find them exits and all of that. And it's a fun process. I love sort of solving the puzzle in terms of product market fit, or at least, those early stages when you're trying to get there. And so that's kind of that's the part of the company journey that I've always been fascinated by and has kind of kept my interest for all these years.
So you've been a part of the whole startup scene, I guess you could say, or, businesses from concept to completion to sale. And you've probably seen, between the successes and the sales, you've also seen the failures, I'm sure. And something we ask everybody that's on the show, especially since you have so much experience with startups, if there were 3 pieces of advice that you can give to either the solopreneur, entrepreneur, small business, or someone starting up that would kind of resonate with them to get through, what would the top 3 pieces of advice that you've seen in your experience be for a startup?
Yeah, the first one I'm actually going to steal from somebody. I heard this on a panel about 5 years ago, and I think it sums it up perfectly, which is sell something to somebody. And I've found this sort of across the board is the earlier I get out there to market with something, even if it's just a service that kind of acts like a product, because I'm trying to figure out what the product should do, the faster I can move. So it's sell something to somebody, get it out there to market without thinking too hard about it, at least in a limited way, so that you can start getting feedback, because I guarantee you whatever you end up building is probably going to look so different than what you thought you were going to build. And if you can sort of get that moving in the right direction, sooner, the better off you're going to be, the less waste there's going to be, the faster you're going to be able to move. So sell something to somebody is number 1. I would say number 2 is don't do it alone. So the first company I founded, I did it as a solo entrepreneur, and it went reasonably well. But I spent 8 years doing it, and I realized, had I had somebody to sort of bounce ideas off of and maybe correct some of the mistakes I was making, or at least maybe rethink some of the directions I was taking it in, I think I could have moved a lot faster on that one. So, co-founders is one way. If you want to bring on co-founders, like advisors, friends, other people, meetup groups, like whatever, like start airing what you're doing early. And so, some of these people can any sort of bad inclinations that you might have, bad ideas that you might have, they can help you knock those down. I think that's immensely important as you're trying to figure things out at the beginning. And then last one I would say is don't hire for sales too early. Don't hire for senior sales too early, because I've made this mistake personally, actually, in one of my startups. Hired a VP of sales way before I had things figured out. And what I think I've realized is, in the beginning, sales, product, client success, marketing, all of that stuff is intertwined, right? And so as you're out there selling your product as the CEO or the main go-to-market co-founder or whatever, these ideas for product directions, these ideas for how you should be onboarding clients differently, these ideas for what the market is wanting or asking for, or what your offer is lacking, that's where you're getting those insights. And so I still do all the sales for Base Estate, because I don't think we've completely figured it out yet. And until we completely figure it out, like, that's going to be the case. So, and I would advise all founders to sort of take the same approach. I know with technical founders in particular, it can feel uncomfortable being out there doing sales, maybe when that's not what you're trying to do. And there's also this temptation of, well, if I bring somebody in who's like a master salesperson, they're going to be able to scale this business and all that. So the temptations are out there, but I think it's ultimately self-defeating to bring those people in too early.
It's interesting you mentioned sales.
I was going to say this
I
one hits
struggle
Dave
with.
at home. Hits him at home.
Real close. And I'll give Gary one of the few compliments here. He actually changed my mind on this. For the longest time, so I'm part of a business group called C12, and I would ask them for years, so part of the thing of C12 is every year it's a group of 12 guys and gals who, and once a year you open your books and you explain everything, and then you mention your issues, and they all feed into you. They're all owners and stuff like that. And I think 3 years in a row, mine was, how do I fix sales? And it was like, do I hire someone? What do I need to do? And the answer is, you got to just keep doing what you're doing. But it took me forever to listen to that, because I wanted to hire someone because I didn't want to keep doing this because it's not comfortable. I mean, I don't mind schmoozing. I don't mind doing that. I like people. So it's not like it's difficult. Like some technical co-founders, it would be difficult, but it's hard, and it takes a lot of time and all of that stuff. So I'm gonna keep trying to offload that. And Gary recently just like beat me over the head with it. Just like, dude, no, you're gonna keep doing this because this is how your company's gonna grow. And I think I'm not alone in that. I think a lot of founders try to get off that train too early and offload. Like even the company I used to work for years and years ago, they hired a director of sales. And what I learned watching that happen, I wasn't really involved with it directly, but what I watched, he was a director of sales, which meant he knew how to manage other salespeople. He had no idea how to bring leads in or any of that other stuff. And I think that's something that people overlook. It's like if you don't have something for them to sell, they have nothing to do.
Right.
They're not magic. And that's, a lot of founders get stuck in that.
Not only that, but
Yep.
also just bringing leads in is a trap in its own, because it could be very industry specific. Like we found out through, trial and error, I guess you could say, and advice of others, that being a custom software development shop that helps startups, how are you getting leads from companies that don't exist yet? You know what I mean? And so then what are we doing? Are we going to market ourselves as an IT group? And that's not really close to what we do. So we get a whole bunch of unqualified leads that are just wasting our time with emails and follow-ups. So yeah, having David, the founder, actually the one who has the most passion about the company itself, go out and network with people and show them that passion, I think is probably the stronger move. So I'll accept the compliment.
Yep.
Thank you.
And the great salespeople I know, they have a process, right? And they're very disciplined about following those processes. Which is, by the way, the reason why I'm not a great salesperson is because I'm kind of sloppy when it comes to follow up. I don't really have a structure. It's just, oh, cool, this person's interested in what I have to offer. I'm going to schedule a call with them, and that's kind of it. And until you can give them enough structure around that enables them to build that process, I think you're doing them a disservice by bringing them on as well. So I think, once you kind of know, all right, we've got the offer locked, we've got the product locked, we know the value proposition, we know the target customer, that's when you bring in that salesperson to implement a process around that structure. Which
happens much later than you think it does. I think that's
right.
That's that kicker is, oh yeah, I'm ready. I've got this. You probably don't. It's just a hunch. You probably don't, because it's harder than you think, and in that process, and you're gonna, in a really good, what I find a lot of people, and including myself, when I want to find a commission only sales guy, right? So I don't have to pay them, and they go out there and they hunt and kill it and drag it back to the cave. If that person exists, which they do. Realtors are good examples of that. They mostly live purely on commission. But they're coming in hungry and they're coming in hot. And if you don't give them everything they need, they're out.
Yeah.
Right? They'll find something else to sell.
Right.
And I think a lot of guys try to skip the line. I was certainly one of them. I didn't hire on commission only, but got pretty close a few times.
Well, and this is related, but I think a lot of founders overestimate how important scaling is early on. So for me at least, the initial at least year, probably 2 years of a startup are just about learning. So it's really just like absorbing, experimenting, trying to figure it out, and then let's worry about scaling. And I think a lot of startup founders, they come out of the gate, they've got this idea, they think it's brilliant, they get their MVP out there, and they're like, okay, cool, like we've got a couple of early adopters, it's time to scale. And it's premature, right? And that can, you run into all sorts of problems with that. Premature hiring, premature fundraising, changing directions on your investors, which they don't like when they put in a seed round a couple months ago. Things like that. That can be avoided if you just say, hey, for the first couple of years, we are going to, we're going to take the capital we need to learn and come up with the scalable business model. And if you can pull that off, I think it's a much more, it's a way of doing things that's got a much higher odds of success.
Well, very cool. I appreciate your time very much and your insights. I think I love your idea. I hope nothing but the best, because there's a lot of startups who need exactly what you're doing, and I love that.
Yeah, it's a, what's the word I'm looking for? Benevolent quest to try to give someone a little bit of a parachute.
Yeah, I mean it's that's part of it, but the other part of it is it's just me being an opportunist when it comes to, hey, here's a portion of the market that's just not getting served, and it's a hard portion of the market to serve. The deals are small. You have to go through a lot of potential acquirers to find the one that's going to be willing to do the deal. So I understand why the market is underserved, but I see an opportunity there if we can figure out how to do it economically.
Do you do you become a part-time therapist for some of these? Because I'm thinking to myself, they had great dreams, right? That this was going to be the next Amazon or whatever, and it's not happening clearly. And you're here to, get something to end. So they're sad. Is what I imagine. A lot of sad people coming to your office.
Or it could be a lot of grateful people that finally find some way to, make a return. Yeah.
I mean, one thing I do like about the way we do things is that if we can't find you a buyer, I mean, there isn't one. Like, we are pretty exhaustive in our process. So I think just having that sort of knowing that they've done everything that they can do is a relief to a lot of founders. What's really interesting, like I said, we get most of our leads through investors. They introduce us into the founders. You would expect those founders to be shocked and surprised and sad that their investors want liquidity on the business or whatever, but that's almost never the case. They're exhausted, right? And I've been there personally, like trying to make a startup work for years that's just not quite working, and it's it'll really sort of grind on your state of being. So having somebody come in and say, okay, I'm gonna find resolution to this one way or another within the next few months. It's a relief usually. So yeah, it's sad. A lot of these companies have been through a lot, and it can be disturbing to see sometimes. But on the other hand, you're offering them some sort of finality to it all, which can be a relief.
Yeah, some sense of closure, if nothing else.
Yeah.
Now, with the new company, Inorganic, is there any anything you want to plug, or a web address, or is it still in the early stages where there's not really anything you want to market and promote yet, or is there any?
Yeah, I'm sort of pre-marketing on this one.
Okay.
It's under development, and so we're building it. Expected launch is in March. It's not going to be a big launch. What we'll probably do is open it up to some beta users. I think the main thing that's going to be different about Inorganic and maybe something I want to get out there is that we're going to have white label capabilities. So people who are already in M&A, we're going to let on there to help find strategic acquirers for some of their client companies. So if they're interested in doing what we do, which is finding acquirers for subscale software companies, we're going to give them those capabilities. So that's the only thing I'm going to plug, and then there'll be more formal announcements in the next couple of months.
Very cool. Well, Gary, if anybody wanted to reach out to us and ask more questions of Paolo or any of our other guests, how would they get in touch with us?
They could simply send us an email at hello@thebigpixel.net, or you can make a comment underneath this video on YouTube, or reach out to us on any of our other social media channels.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Paolo, for joining us. This has been really great and really awesome conversation. Thank you again.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was fun. Appreciate it.